thank you very much for the introduction. I'd like to start with a quote, if I might. It's not about complexity per se, it's about technology. It's a quote from a leading scientific journal about the pace of change of technology. And we've talked a lot about technology in the context of complexity, and so I thought it would be a good way to start. So here's the quote. "It is not too much to say that more has been done, richer and more prolific discoveries have been made, grander achievements have been realized in the course of the 50 years of our own lifetime." Sorry, Gen Yers, these are old people talking. So, then in all the previous lifetime of the race. The progress effected in this generation contrasts surprisingly with the aggregate of the progress in all generations put together since the earliest dawn of authentic history. Now, I don't know if that resonates with you, the pace of technology being so dramatic and changing that it feels absolutely unprecedented. So the journal is Scientific American, so a leading journal. The interesting thing you might note is that the date, it's 1868. And I say thank you to Henry Mintzberg, from whom I first heard this. And of course, they were talking about the incredible transformational change of the telegraph, the first intercontinental cable that had just been put in, the locomotive because the transcontinental railway was just about to be finished, and the electric light was undergoing the first stages of commercialization. So what I think humanity tends to do is, on a repeated basis, at whatever time they are in the history of mankind, make an argument that this is unprecedented. It's never been like this before. We are going through something completely and utterly different. And I believe that is the argument that is being currently made about complexity. Oh, complexity is rising. It's not like ever before. It's probably just exactly like 1868 in my view. In my view, I can't make any argument to myself. I tried hard, because this was the conference and I was supposed to talk about this. I tried really hard to make a coherent argument to myself that the world is stunningly more complex than it used to be. But then Don put up the starlings, and I think to myself, well, is their life more complex than it used to be? I think they're still trying to search for food, have safety, get warmed up before they go to bed at night. I'm not sure that's changed. And I'm not sure all the things we talked about, human beings, how they can or cannot work together, have dialogues or not, whatever. I'm not sure that's changed so much either. The way I think about it, for what it's worth, is that everything we know in life starts out a mystery. It becomes a heuristic if we learn more about it, and some things become an algorithm. And no matter how many things we push from mystery to heuristic to algorithm, guess what? There are always mysteries there, and those mysteries all sound to us very complicated. And they're always new, and so we sort of think, wow, this is a complicated new mystery, but they've kind of always been there. Now, our favorite technique, I would argue, over the last period of time, over the last couple hundred years, if you want to say it, but intensifying over the last 50 years, is to deal with these mysteries, to try and understand the world, is to take the two kinds of complexity in broad terms that we face: detail complexity, which is the number of factors we have to take into consideration, and dynamic complexities, the trickiness of the cause and effect relationships between the variables that we have to take into account. What we've done as we've become ever more scientific is to handle the dynamic complexity by minimizing and simplifying the detail complexity. That is to say, to take into account fewer things so that we can understand those things better, which has created silos of knowledge, ever deeper silos of knowledge. What deep silos of knowledge that ignore or simplify detail complexity do is create out of thin air absolutely up in air, interdomain complexity. So we have people who have deep knowledge and use terminology that other people can't possibly understand to explain the causal relationships in their very narrow discipline. And then when they talk to other people, those other people say, wow, is this ever complex? I can't believe how complex this is. Wow, because I don't understand a word they're saying, and they seem to have all this knowledge there, so I'm scared. So the interesting thing to me is that the approach, we've got an approach to deal with complexity that causes more complexity, and then we blame complexity for the problem and not our approach. Now, whenever this happens, I tend to think differently. And what I mean by this is whenever we have a diagnosis of the problem in the world, in this case, the problem is the world is a complex place with uncertainty and nonlinearity, as Helga said on the first day in her blog. And so we then take that problematique and essentially develop an approach. We're going to break things into narrow silos, i.e. to manage detail complexity, to deal with dynamic complexity using the scientific method on narrow problems. And that will manage complexity. That's our thesis. But then complexity, in our view, rises. You know, it was supposed to fall because we have a method for dealing with it, and it rises. Now, there could be two reasons, right, legitimate reasons. One is complexity is rising so fast that it is really awesome that we're using our clever approach, otherwise it would be way higher than it is. Now, notice how profoundly unscientific that approach to using science is. Or you could come to the second conclusion, which our approach sucks. Guess which the world chooses, right? It chooses G. Thank goodness we're managing complexity that's exploding out of sight as well as we are, because who knows how terrible it would be if we weren't so clever. My approach, generally speaking, in these situations is to sack the approach. If the approach cannot deal with the problem, using as an excuse that the problem is much harder than we thought, and that's why the approach isn't as effective as we thought, I think is not what you want to do. My rule, for what it's worth on things like this, is it would be to have an approach whose success is defined by keeping the problem at least level. I feel, for what it's worth, the analogy for me, because I'm sort of an economist on the side, is places like the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada that set inflation targets, right? And they say, here's the inflation target, and we're going to manage to that inflation target. We're going to tighten monetary policy if inflation gets out of hand, loosen it if it's below. So they've got that view. I would have the same view, which is our approach, whatever approach we use, should say we have to, if our approach to managing complexity, right, is that we got to keep complexity at the same level. If it's rising, we got a bad approach, change it to some approach that's more successful. What I do think is an approach that can and will work if used is to explicitly deal with interdomain complexity. Because it's naturally going to happen. As soon as you have a complex system, you will have interdomain complexity, which is the complexity that's caused by different models, completely different and seemingly incommensurable models that are used in two different domains that are side by side, if you will, and need to be integrated, right? That does create complexity. If you have comorbidity in a patient and you've got a heart specialist and a liver specialist and they don't know what each other's field is all about, but the patient actually needs you to integrate across those, you have interdomain complexity. I think we do not teach that at all, certainly not in the business schools. We teach deep silos of information and language systems that apply to finance, and then a different language system that applies to OB, and then a different language system that applies to marketing, so that the students are taught when you have interdomain conflict, you choose the better and more important domain, right? and apply the tools you learned in that domain and ignore the other domain and just say, well, that doesn't matter as much. Instead, my approach is to teach students actually how to deal with interdomain complexity directly with something that I call integrative thinking. The interesting thing is that 99.9% of business academics consider it unscientific. Right? Remember, it is scientific to say complexity it must be increasing so fast despite what we're doing, that what we're doing is absolutely the best. Right? That's scientific. Unscientific is teaching people a systematic way of solving interdomain complexity. And the fun thing of late is we've been teaching this to kiddies, and this absolutely, even younger than all of you people up there. We've been teaching it to children as young as 8 years old, and they absolutely love it and can do it. And my advocacy is, if we really want to have leadership, we have to train leaders with the skill of managing interdomain complexity. In fact, I would argue that the leaders that are successful, and this is I did a study of successful leaders on this front, the leaders that are successful, despite having zero formal training in managing interdomain complexity, have somehow managed to learn that on their own, and in my view, that is what makes them so successful and so distinct from others. So I think it's time to recognize that our approach to dealing with the complexity of the world is fundamentally flawed, and stop making excuses about it and do something instead. Thank you very much.